It wasn't recording.
Okay, go for it.
Well, first of all, Ms. Bautista, I want to thank you for making yourself available to making your time. I know your time is valuable, and so I really appreciate you spending some time helping me with this project that I'm doing for class. Just to give you a little context of what this project is, we've been studying the history of environmentalism, and also we're trying to identify different people who have changed the narrative of environmentalism or are changing the narrative of environmentalism. And so we're supposed to choose somebody that we feel is living up to that standard, and also is maybe like a person of color or a person who has connection to the land or ancestral wisdom. So that's why I've chosen you, because I feel that you represent that very well. And so I'd just like to get started by giving you an opportunity to explain what your connection to the land is.
I actually, when I think about my connection to the land, I think back to when I was maybe 2 or 3 years old. Like, I have this vivid memory of my parents taking me camping. So yeah, I guess I would have been 3 years old, and I went to Yosemite, and I was in a tent, and it was nighttime, and I heard a noise outside. And so I woke up, and I remember speaking in Espanol, because that's the language that I started out speaking. I said, ¿Qué es eso? And my tia Yudi was like, es un oso, vete a dormir, which means it's a bear, go to sleep. And I was like, okay. And I went back to sleep. And I realize now in my adulthood that that experience really impacted the way I see the land and nature. Like, one of the things that makes me feel like I'm at home and safe is being with family in outdoor spaces. Yosemite has had a big impact throughout my life, and being there with the people that I love has also had a huge impact on my life. In fact, this weekend I took my family back to the mountains, to Sequoia, and all we did was walk. And there's nothing, like, there's no cell phone service, like I didn't make a TikTok video. It was just about like my family being together. And like, even though it was windy and like there was dust and there were like killer pine cones coming down, we were happy. And I guess we were experiencing life. It felt like we were alive and living and going on an adventure together. Granted, my child was like, so like, I learned some things too, that like the land is powerful, and that we should always be prepared when you're going out into nature. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. Thank you. So one of the other criteria that our new ecological heroes demonstrate is that they contribute to their community in some way. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on ways in which you contribute to your community, and what communities do you consider yourself a part of?
Okay. Well, I think I see the biggest part of my identity right now is teacher mom. Mom and teacher go hand in hand. And it requires a lot of sacrifices, mostly sleep. I will say, for folks that are like thinking about being a mom, or a parent rather, imagine like never sleeping or playing video games or reading or dancing for like 2 years.
Wow.
What you're doing is you're helping to create a human, right? And so one of the things that I see myself doing for the community is trying to create this human that is respectful, humble, funny, that can go off and make a big difference in the world. Same thing with being a teacher. I have less power over it because most people don't really respect teachers. But I like to think that if there's at least one student that heard something that change their mind about like respecting the land or respecting the world or just respect in general, then I would have made a difference. So I don't look at uplifting community as like, oh, well, I became president and I changed the world by creating this law. Like, that's awesome. Please go do that if that's in your wheelhouse. But I think of like little differences making big changes. And I hope that if there's one student that like goes off and says like, oh, actually I learned something that helped to make my life a little better, easier, or I helped someone because of something that I learned from Miss Bautista's class, then my life would be made.
Awesome. So the one thing I heard a couple times in that response was the concept of respect, and I really feel like that's an important factor in, you know, taking care of the land, taking care of the environment. Do you feel like, where do you feel like you were given this like connection to respect? Do you think that was something that is passed down, like ancestral wisdom, or is this something that you learned on your own? Like, where does this concept of respect enter into your you know, worldview and
It's got to start like generations back, right? I think um, so. Both of my grandfathers in Guatemala were killed, and so like my entire family from my grandma's on has been like mostly a matriarchy. Like the women have ruled, and so like my grandma, she started hustling like with 4 kids. She would go sell bread she would get up at like 3 a.m. to bake bread, to go sell bread like at 6 a.m. And then start all over again the next day. Like um, I also think of my other grandma who had like 9 kids, 2 of whom died, and how she like there would always be food at her house. She would always have some sort of tamales or rice or beans like that. Like you could never go without eating at her house. In fact, sometimes she'd be like, "You are not leaving until you finish eating that." And so, like the matriarchy, the woman power, the way that these women raised their families, it was, I think, so much sacrifice that their offspring, like my parents, saw that and realized like, oh, like I have to make their sacrifices worth it. Um, I can't go off and act like a fool when my mom is working this hard to raise me. And I think my parents also came to this country and like raised me to be respectful, and they role modeled like hard work. And so I think that's where that comes from.
excellent, excellent. So my final question uh, has to do with this word environmentalist. As we know, this is a very loaded word these days, and especially with politics being so polarized. So I'm wondering what it means to you to be an environmentalist.
I see everyone who cares about the earth and the people in it as being an environmentalist. And I wish that more people saw it that way. Um, I think that too often the idea of environmentalism is like that they're vegan and that they drive Priuses and or like just kind of like aggressively like pro earth. But I think an environmentalist, like you're not pro earth if you're not pro people and taking care of people as well.
Mm. So I have a follow-up question to that. Do you think that people can be aggressively pro-earth and pro-people, or do you think that they are mutually exclusive?
I think people can be pro earth and pro people, but I think it's hard for some people to see it that way. Like an example is you go to a restaurant and you get a styrofoam cup or whatever. Like I'm gonna take it um, if that's what the restaurant says to me. Like is their policy. You have to use one of our cups, but Like some people would see that and be like, oh, you're against the earth, and like shame people. And I think that's where like it gets hard for people who are so pro like land, pro earth, that they also shame others for not doing the same.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I worked with somebody once just like that. Well, I want to thank you again for your time and for making your wisdom and your ancestral knowledge available for my project, for my class. I have a really good feeling that my teacher is going to like the interview that I present. And I just want to thank you also for the effort that you make on a day-to-day basis, and for being the leader that you are in big and small ways.
Thank you, Mr. Avenna.
Thank you.